Hello and welcome. The Barcelona meeting, which was the last of the international meetings before the Copenhagen conference on climate change, has just finished. To all appearances, the Barcelona meeting was an even damper squib than the Bangkok conference. In the lead up to the Copenhagen conference, it looks as if we are now heading down an extremely slippery slope. To discuss the recent developments and prospects at Barcelona, we have with us today Dr. Surya Sethi, formerly Principal Advisor with the Planning Commission in India and also a key member of the negotiating team. Dr. Sethi, the Barcelona meeting seems to have been, even from day one, a non-starter. Whereas at least in Bangkok, there was some pretense at trying to get somewhere. In the context of the Barcelona meeting, how do you see the Copenhagen conference and prospects for it?
I have personally seen that this is not just Bangkok or Barcelona, but even well before that in Bonn or even earlier than that. I think some of the bigger players in this game had already decided that the outcome of Copenhagen will not be an agreement of sorts, but would essentially be a political statement coming from the heads of the state. And Barcelona makes it amply clear. In fact, just yesterday or day before, Lord Stern was here making a pitch for such a political statement. And I think that's the way it is going. The sense I have is that Copenhagen will end up only as a political rhetoric. And that, I agree with you, is an extremely slippery slope for a country such as India.
The tendency towards statements of intention and aspirational goals regarding climate change is, as you say, predates Bangkok, goes back to the L'Aquila statement, and in fact even to some of the previous G8 summits with the G8 plus 5 format. If Copenhagen ends up with such a vaguely worded statement of principle or intention, doesn't that open the door for all kinds of interpretations later?
Precisely. I mean, that's the purpose of this statement, because if you look at the way the discussions are going, essentially today the developed world wishes to walk away from historical responsibility, and the historical responsibility was the basis of the Framework Convention and the Kyoto Protocol. And because they want to walk away from this historical responsibility and recast this whole debate into a new agreement, the best option for them is to have such a political statement which comes from the heads of the states and becomes some kind of a bind on future negotiations in terms of, look, this is how what was meant, this is what was said, and opens up the door completely for essentially a completely new agreement. Which is where they are already talking about that. In fact, Japan has said so in Barcelona. Australia has said so in Barcelona, that they need a new agreement in which everybody is party. That's the euphemism they use.
Right. Given the opposition to such a development, particularly by the least developed countries, by the small island states, and at least by a substantial number of developing countries as well, do you think that such an abandoning of the very foundations of the Kyoto Protocol or of the framework is actually going to transpire, or is this going to be tough bargaining?
See, I have always believed that India is the only country among the non-Annex 1 countries which has the moral authority to really lead the LDCs. Okay? Because if you look at India, our comparators, whether demographic, economic, social, we are akin to the bottom 50% of the world. Unfortunately, we are always trying to get clubbed with the G8 plus 5, with BRIC. But if you look at the individual countries and the groupings that we are aspiring to join, there is no parallel between us and those countries, whether it's China, whether it is Brazil, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Russia. We have no parallels with them. Our real parallels lie with the bottom 50% of the world, and we would be best served if we led that grouping and took a stand, whether it is in Copenhagen or wherever it is, and stood firmly behind that group. Because that's where our emission parameters are, that's where our demographic parameters are, that's where our socio-economic parameters are.
At the Bangkok conference, I remember some of the press conferences afterwards with the G77 plus China, the press conferences addressed by the Indian delegation. There were several questions raised about the performance of the Indian delegation, and questions were asked whether the delegation was actually speaking with one voice, and whether the delegation was sounding as tough in Bangkok as some saw it as having been in earlier conferences. Do you think there's been a shift in the official Indian position?
Well, one shift is that I'm no longer part of that team.
Yes, quite.
So some of the hard-hitting sentences are not there. But I think I would be being dishonest if I say that there is not sufficient confusion. If to an outsider there appears whether what is really a stand. Okay, because we keep giving different versions and then keep saying that no, there is no basic shift in our stand. I think the PM is very right in saying that India should be part of a solution. Okay, I completely agree with him. He has not said that we should be part of a solution at the cost of Indians.
Right.
Okay. He has just said that we should show flexibility and be part of a solution. And I think we owe it to ourselves to really craft such a solution. And as I again said at the beginning, we are truly the only country which has the moral authority to do so.
Quite.
And but whether we are succeeding in doing that, I have my doubts.
Yeah.
And that is why you see this confusion as to what really is the stand. Are we tough? Are we soft? Are we, meandering our way through some minefield? I don't know. But that's the impression we are giving,
Right.
which is unfortunate.
And part of the perception also perhaps owes itself to contrary voices from within government. And in the last 2 or 3 months, there have been fairly authoritative voices from within the Indian government which have spoken of the same kind of, we should be ready for a political statement at Copenhagen, we should not look for ambitious solutions, we should go along with a statement of intentions and so on.
Again, we are a very pluralistic democracy, and I think there will always be multiple voices in this democracy, and I think that's healthy. Okay, I have nothing against that. But what is missing is a serious debate among those dissenting voices to then craft a national consensus. That is what is missing. It's not, the problem is not that there are dissenting voices. That's, in my view, it's a very healthy situation if there are dissenting voices. But what is needed is that these dissenting voices should be brought together on a platform so that there is some open public debate with the full view of the civil society, which ultimately leads to crafting a situation that is acceptable to everybody.
Sure.
And that, I see, is not happening. Whatever is happening is behind closed doors, and which is unfortunate in my opinion.
Right. There seems to now be a bit of a rush of leaders, particularly from Western countries, who are promising to land up in Copenhagen to give this leadership content to whatever statement emerges from there. Do you think our Prime Minister will go, and do you think he should?
He probably is not very happy committing that he will go, as I've heard many other leaders are not very happy. But If that's where it is headed, and tomorrow Mr. Obama sends out an invitation to major economies to come and attend the meeting, I think it will be very difficult for them not to go. But having said that, I think to succumb to a political statement would be very detrimental to our interests, in my view. And it would be better to have no agreement than to have a bad agreement, because that bad agreement will then clear the pitch for future negotiations, because there will be negotiations post-Copenhagen.
Sure.
Copenhagen is not the end of everything that we have been
Sure.
talking about. And if you have a kind of a bad agreement, then future negotiations will become that much more complex and that much more difficult to handle.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sethi.